Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome to to a
Great
discussion.
start, great start, Philip. We're professionals.
I was laughing in anticipation of pranking you by just starting without giving you a chance to click on the button. But anyway, so welcome to a discussion. We're very serious now. It's a very serious book
Mhm.
here, AP. Stephen Erikson's. No, actually, it's not serious at all. It's really funny. I mean, he does lean on the comedy for this one, doesn't he? We'll talk about that. But this is No
Yeah,
Life Forsaken, book two of the Witness series. Is that what it's called now? The Witness series? The
yeah, or
Witness
tetralogy, or
Tale of Witness. So,
tales of witness.
whatever.
You can never trust those authors, those tricksy authors who just like
Especially
put out book
Erikson.
after book.
Yeah, he's gonna keep changing his mind, whatever. So whatever. The series in which Karsa shall not appear.
Well, actually, you know what? At some point, we need to talk about this because I think that aspect of it is something that people have a.
Oh, I know.
We will talk about this in a minute. Get on with the introduction so we can actually get
I know.
started.
I brought that up deliberately. So yeah. Okay. We are going to talk seriously now about No Life Forsaken, second book in the Witness series by Stephen Erikson. This is a follow-up series to the Malazan Book of the Fallen. This takes place after the 10 books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen in the Malazan universe. And yeah, it is. I don't know. I'm loving this series so far. I absolutely adored the first book, The God Is Not Willing, and in that book, we were in the a familiar, part of the Malazan world, in Genabakis, and in No Life Forsaken. Guess what Steven Erikson does? He pulls us over to an entirely different continent. He's never done that before, has he? So he brings us all the way over to seven cities in the second book. And I felt so great about that. I was like, yeah, I had to smile when I realized, okay, this is seven cities. Good. Yep. I'm buckled up. I'm ready. So yeah, and thematically, there are going to be some familiar themes in here, but also I think some nuances and new things as well. And in terms of the tone of it, I felt that this did lean a little more comedic, Malazan humor. So don't feel like when I say more comedic, it's just ha ha funny and that kind of thing, because Malazan humor tends to be a bit dark at times, a bit gallows humor, if you will, especially when it's coming from the Malazan soldiers and some new ones of those. So some cool marine mages and all that. So lots to love in here. But this discussion we're having right now on my channel, us meaning myself and the Nemesis, a critical dragon, Dr. AP Canavan, otherwise known as Professor Fireballs. And we're going to have the non-spoiler portion of this. We're talking themes and other things. And then we will move over to a critical dragon a little bit later. Well, we'll get deep into the spoilers. So, how's that sound, AP?
That sounds great, Nemesis. Remember, you are the Nemesis. Me, innocent victim of the evil, nefarious Nemesis. That's how this works.
Where is your tweed?
We all know evil people wear tweed.
No, it's you've got that reversed. So, so
It's good to
anyway,
see you, Phil. It's good to see you, Phil, because we haven't done one of these in quite some time because
been a
I've been
while.
AWOL.
Yeah, you have, and plus Erickson hasn't written a bunch of new books for us to talk about. So, it's his fault.
Well, he has. They haven't been published yet.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, and you probably read them because you're an advanced reader. That's what advanced readers do. They read books in advance. So,
Yes.
lucky you. Now I hate you more. I
It pales in insignificance to the hate that I hold for you in my heart. You
know.
evil, evil man.
So, so I want to let you have a chance to speak because I've been blabbing away here. What are your non-spoiler impressions of No Life Forsaken?
Well, like obviously up front, the this version that you have, when I initially read this, um, it was a slightly different book because this was obviously I had read it before Erikson made the decision that he was going to split off aspects into a second book.
Ah.
And so this is almost like in my head at the minute, this is like the first part of a duology.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Huh.
it's the first side of a coin investigating this whole thing that's happening in Seven Cities. So
Hmm.
it was very interesting for me to see, and it's a weird perspective to see things that I knew were happening were no longer in the book, and I'm like, hang on a second, but I know what that's connected to, and I know this thing.
You're cheating. You're always cheating.
Um, but weirdly enough, what then this book I think did was it consolidates everything into a much more tightly focused and constrained thematic focus.
Yes.
And where when the two were together, there was a big sort of overarching, this is what it's all investigating, but it was a lot of moving parts. Whereas
Huh.
this is broken down and going, no, we're focusing on this. So there's a this feels to me, and again, this could be because I had read the other version, but this feels a lot tighter and more focused
Okay.
than the first version. And in a lot of respects, then I think it fits with the style that Erikson was going for with The God Is Not Willing, that
Yeah.
tighter focus on a much more singular aspect to be investigated. Even
Yeah.
though, yeah, there are multiple perspectives. There are little plot threads that are all interweaving and coming together. So there's a lot of familiarity for people who have already read Malazan books to go, oh yeah, there's going to be a bunch of different characters. And they're going to have positions and argue about various philosophical things. And there's going to be political maneuvering and backstabbing and all of this going on. And then there's going to be some crazy Marines who are going to kill people. And
Yeah.
you know, it has all of those things. And as you pointed out, there's an underlying humor to this.
Right.
And some of it I think is very much you either have to laugh or you end up crying
Yeah.
because there's a lot of darkness being held at bay in this. There's a lot of a contemplation of the futility of things, of the destructive nature of humanity. And we either just accept it, roll over and die, or fight against it. And that humor, that poking fun at the darkness as a way to bring light into it and to energize the people to go, no, but you still have to carry on. I think that is a key thing here. So I greatly enjoyed this. There are no Malazan books that I have not enjoyed. So, people take that with a pinch of salt. But I greatly enjoyed this, and it was investigating something. In terms of pairing, the one book in the entirety of, say, like the Malazan canon that I think this goes really neatly with
Hmm.
is actually Stonewielder by Ian C. Esselman.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I can see
Um,
that from the perspective of religious fervor and whipping up people in the name of a cause that is particularly wed to a kind of a nationalist agenda. So yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
so again, weirdly enough, like I think Esselman's investigation of belief, spirituality, the power of religion, but also how religions can be corrupted and religions can be misused, or how religions spring up
Mm,
and what happens with them. That Esselmond had explored that in Stonewielder,
yeah.
and we see, I think, a lot of that same exploration, but from a very different perspective from Erikson. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think they work very neatly as sort of companion pieces, as this idea of the intersection of religion as a concept and religion as uh, an existent thing that exists in the real world and how it interacts with reality, but also the impact and balancing between dogma, between faith, spirituality,
Yeah.
good intentions versus the reality of the situation, and also how good actors and bad actors can add to the thing and complicate the picture. That it's not that this is a mess, but it's a a very particular picking apart of different interactions of politics and religion in this fantasy setting.
Hmm.
And again, like Erikson's very careful. This is not the real world. This is not a direct commentary on the real world, but
Right.
it is exploring things that I think that are very important to the real world. And this is one of the things I've said is the strength of fantasy. If Erikson had written a novel about real world religions and the interaction between them and real world politics, that can be incredibly polarizing and very objectionable and hurtful to certain people or insulting to other people because you're dealing with people's real beliefs. You're dealing with people's real politics and real histories and cultures. But by shifting it into a fantasy world, by taking that imaginative leap beyond the mimetic and into the fantastic, we strip away some of that initial knee-jerk reaction to, well, I already understand the situation. And we start looking at this interaction of religions as concepts with politics as concepts.
Right.
And yeah, I think it's an exploration of things that we see in the world around us, but in a way to help us explore it without um, deliberately pointing fingers at any one real aspect, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, it does. There are a lot of political machinations going on in this story, and at times I felt that some of it was very close to things that are happening in our world. While I never thought, oh, this person in the book represents that political figure or anything like that. There are certain types of political leaders. I'm sure there are some there are some leaders who highly resemble, like Nub, for example. So, but I didn't feel like it was ever a one for one thing. While it was still very, I thought, interesting commentary or exploration, really, on certain things. Like, without getting into the actual details, you have this is post Malazan Book of the Fallen. There is a an emperor who is well known to Malazan readers, who is in charge of things. Not a character that actually appears in the story, but has a lot of reach and has a kind of effect, somewhat like Karsa, actually, a character who does not appear in the story, but still has his echoes of his deeds, and his intentions are at play in the story. This emperor has, as you know, if you're a Malazan reader, an adjunct, someone that represents that person and is supposed to be the will of the emperor reaching out, the right hand, the tool, the implement. But that also is a human being there, isn't it? And the idea that you have someone who's giving themselves to a political cause, and also in a way that, from a just a more humane perspective, that person could be put into a role, and we saw this in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or right in the very first book, where an adjunct is put into a role that that person doesn't always feel that comfortable with, and the idea that someone who is actually valuable and is useful and good at what they do could be perceived as a threat by an empire, and therefore that person has to be eliminated because they're too good at what they do. Tells you how dysfunctional a giant political system can be, and how cynical people can get who are working within that system. So there's a lot. It gets pretty dark, so.
And that's setting up that very, and for people worried about spoilers, like what Philip is talking about is set out like in chapter one. So like this is not giving away anything. But the the fact that we have this exploration of the tenuous nature of power within the empire.
Right.
And as you point out, like one of the things Erikson sometimes called a colonial apologist.
Hmm.
And I think that does disservice to the criticism he has of empire from the beginning. And people have pointed this out, particularly with Gardens of the Moon, and they go, "Oh yeah, but the Marines or the bridge burners are so wonderful, and they're the heroes, and blah blah blah." And you go, but the very first thing we see of the empire is the empire slaughtering its own citizens in Mock's Hold.
Yeah.
The second thing we see of the Empire are the soldiers killing one of the Malazan citizens at the side of the road, and then ordering the slaughter of a bunch of others. Like
And then
the
the
Empire,
slaughter of a bunch of civilians in a city that is basically helpless, allowing the Allies to basically get their vengeance, you know? So, yeah.
yeah, like the Empire is never described as good.
Right.
But and it reminds me a lot of the life of Brian, where it's, oh yeah, the Empire is absolutely evil. What have the Romans ever done for us? The aqueducts. And this, I think, is part of what Erikson does. Is it's so easy to go colonialism bad, and like we're all pretty much agreed, colonialism pretty damn bad. But to deny that there are aspects of it that have positive potential benefits is not to say that it is good, because there is a cost to all of this.
Right.
And that's part, I think, that's actually explored more in this book than I think in any of the others. That
Hmm.
this is actually talking about the cost of colonialism.
Right.
That it's not necessarily the simple dichotomy of good or bad, because that is overly reductive and far too simplistic. Like that's what you tweet on X about something.
Right.
Um, but when you're actually thinking about it, you go, right, what does colonialism do? What are the benefits that it brings? It brings all of these benefits. Are those cost free? No, there are huge costs to it. So then we start thinking about, are the benefits worth the cost? What if colonialism, the empire wasn't there? Would the everyday citizen's life be better? And then we get into this really interesting discussion about essentially, is it the lesser of two evils? Or is it's the best system that someone has come up with so far until we find a better system? That this is a stepping stone on the way to understanding a better way for humans to live with each other.
Yeah.
That this is what one of the things I find fascinating about a lot of the Malazan stuff. It's very rare that Erikson takes a very direct stance on something,
Hmm.
particularly something as big as this. What we find in a lot of Erikson's works and in Esselman's is this investigation of the concepts, this playing around with them, looking at them from different angles. Because very rarely is it as simple and as straightforward as, oh yeah, but that's just bad.
Right.
Um, and that complexity, that challenging of knee-jerk assumptions or initial assumptions that we have, that for me is one of the joys of books like this, where when we think of the perception of religion, and even if we are a deeply religious person ourselves, if we have come from a deeply religious and spiritual background, we can still acknowledge, yeah, religion's been pretty responsible for some of the worst atrocities ever committed by humans.
Hmm.
And then, we might say, oh, but it wasn't the religion did that. It was the people within the religion. And you go, right, now we're starting to get into the nuance of exactly what Erikson is exploring. How much of it is the religion? How much of it is the people within that religion? How much of it is dogma? How much of it is a power grab? And that's what we see spilling out in these pages. This intersection of religion as another form of political governance, another form of power, manipulating, but also comforting certain people. And the
Right.
complexity of there are very few people who are absolutely 100% evil, and very few people who are absolutely, completely 100% good. That almost everyone has this sort of mixture. And seeing how that plays out is kind of important.
I agree. And we're talking about a lot of really big picture stuff here. And a lot of the events depend upon the ability of one figure or another to harness the will of multitudes. Even the way that's how, in a sense, that's how ascendancy works. And at least one of the ways that ascendancy can work in the Malazan world is a kind of focal point for the will of the multitude, right? That can be an individual who becomes a god or something like that. And yet, even as we have these big picture things, one of the things that I think Erikson does so beautifully is he makes it personal with characters that we all, I don't mind saying and it's not spoilery at all for me to say, I love this new character, Shamal. I think she's fantastic. There are certain characters in here that I absolutely adore. And I think that's something that's very important for us as readers to see how these big picture things affect individuals and their pain and their suffering. And that makes it feel much more real. It's a much more emotional experience when we have characters that we're either rooting for or, maybe we're against or whatever, but they're in the midst of all these big things going on. And somehow having these characters portrayed for us so effectively makes it much more emotional and personal. And especially in this story, I felt, and this is something that Erikson does in a big way in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where suffering is something that he explores so in so many ways in that series, and it's just central to the series. But here, I also felt like this was a theme that he took up again in almost a slightly new way, where we're looking at not only suffering, but how do we as individuals respond to that suffering? And I can vividly remember there's a point in here which we can talk about when we do the spoilers, but one character talks about about fairness, how life's not fair, right? This idea comes up, and it applies to several of the characters in the course of the story. But life's not fair, and I used to say that to my mother all the time. That's not fair. When I was mad at her for making me do something or punishing me or something, I'd say that's not fair, and she would respond, "Life's not fair," So get
Well,
used
tell
to
you
it.
what, Philip, I can let me put this in a so people can't even see who says this. We'll just bring
Uh,
up that passage that you're just talking about.
yeah, yeah, good, yeah.
And I'm gonna double check here to make sure that there's nothing
No
in it
spoilers.
that is going to be a spoiler.
That one paragraph, I think it would be fine by itself. Yeah. But what
Yeah.
follows it, we shouldn't touch. But yeah.
No, that's why I'm moving it into its own document
Oh,
so
cool.
that
But look at the tech guy here. Wow. All right.
there you go.
There we go. All right, beautiful. So let's read it first for people. Well, the essential injustice of what you were born with and what you had to contend with every day of your life in that body. And that's valid, isn't it? After all, there's really no end to the injustice in this thing we call living. The impossibility of perfection. That's what haunts every soul. You, me, everyone. And the worst thing about it is, we each have a sense of that perfection. Some aspects of it we can strive towards in how we shape our lives, but other aspects, the physical maladies, what we're born with, or what comes to us as we age, why we can't do a damn thing about any of that, can we? And that, my friend, is unfair. And I love what this whole conversation, which we can talk about later when we're on your channel, but I love how this is something that is so anchored in the individual stories here, and yet it's something we all relate to deeply. This sense of if my life had just this one thing had gone a little differently, or if I'd had this opportunity play out the way it should have, or what could have been, and I think we all feel that to some degree. And how do you respond to that sense of injustice, that sense of unfairness? That's the question that we are asked to ponder here, I think. That's the question that the characters are dealing with in that moment in the story. And that is what makes the difference. Okay, so how do you respond to that? What are you going to do now? Okay, it's fine. Life's unfair. You didn't get what you thought you deserved out of it. But now what? What are you going to do about it?
And I think this actually brings up one of the big thematic elements that's explored in this book in particular, and that's the positive and negative aspects of anger.
Hmm.
Um, that this wrath, this anger, this fury. We talk about righteous anger. Like we are angry for a good reason. One of the things that I think that is explored in this is this anger, this destructive thing, but how sometimes it is absolutely justified.
Yeah.
That there's a reason that this anger was created, and it's an injustice and it is unfair. Therefore, we should be angry. But I think one of the things that we see explored in this is how do we know as individuals when we are justified and righteous in that anger, or
Hmm.
when we are unjustified and that the anger is actually misplaced? That again, this goes to if we had perfect knowledge of something, if we were able to analyze things absolutely perfectly, we go, yes, this is absolutely right. And that would be the wrong thing to do. But when we're caught up in the moment and we have characters who are caught up in truly righteous rage, and then we have other characters who believe they are truly caught up in righteous rage, but
Mm,
actually we see the injustice of what they are doing. And suddenly, this complexity of it, it acknowledges and validates those feelings of anger and upset that we have.
right.
It acknowledges the fact that we believe that we are perfectly correct and reasonable to be having those feelings. And then it stops to ask the question, but if you weren't you and you looked at this situation,
Mm,
is this anger justified in that context? And again, it forces that sense of perspective. And one of the things that Erikson has done throughout his books, taking these concepts and giving us different examples to explore them from different directions, to
right.
see um, these concepts, these themes, these things that are being explored from different points of view. So rather than writing a very complicated treatise on the subject and going, here are all the different extrapolations of this, it's like, let me illustrate it for you. Let me show you an example of what this looks like. And you might resonate with that. But now I want to show you what that example looks like from someone else's perspective.
Right.
Because when we're caught up in it, we believe that we are righteous. That's why we feel the way that we feel. Like we think we are right, but we can be mistaken. Maybe we don't have all the information. Maybe we are actually overreacting. There are a whole bunch of things, and being forced to confront that is a very sobering, um, but also quite comforting aspect. This is something that everyone experiences. This rage and anger that we feel at what we perceive as injustice. But also the questioning, can we just assume that we are right? No, we have to go deeper than that because this anger, when it is unleashed, can be extraordinarily destructive to ourselves, to other people. And that anger, that wrath, that rage, that incandescent fire that we see exhibited time and time again in this novel.
Such as might come from a critical dragon.
Well, fireballs are entirely justified. If you didn't say stupid things, Philip, I wouldn't throw fireballs at you.
But saying stupid things is my specialty. So, uh,
Oh,
spe-
so what do you think of what I've just said there about like some of the anger and rage and fire that we see in this is entire, I think, justified from the character point of view,
yeah.
but also justified from an external point of view. And some of them, we see that it's not justified. So, what do you think of that as a theme that maybe is being explored?
Oh, yeah, I agree. And one of the words that I've used in the past to describe Malazan is affirmative. And I think that really applies here as well because there's the assumption that we can choose what to do with this anger, that we have the ability to respond to this. Okay, so yes, there's injustice and unfairness in the world. There's suffering, there are terrible things that happen in the world. But I think one of the things that's being explored in here is that we have the ability to choose how to respond to this. And and how we choose to respond will form us, will make us into what we become, you know, because we're dealing with really powerful things here. This anger is very powerful.
Mhm.
So choose wisely, but also um, understand that the choices you make will have repercussions, not only for the world around you, but for yourself and who you become. So I think that without saying anything specific here, I can't go into more detail. But yes, I entirely agree that, and this is a new wrinkle on a theme I feel that Erikson explored beautifully in the Malazan book, The Fall, and the idea of suffering and how we respond to it. And of course, the other side of that is compassion, isn't it? When we see that there is suffering in the world, there is the possibility to respond with compassion, right? And that is something again, that's a word that's used a lot in the context of Malazan, but it's not just compassion good, as we've said in the past. It's okay. Here are when is compassion an appropriate response to suffering, you know? And there are moments in the story where you see that understanding leap out, that where you see, and sometimes in unexpected ways too. Um, Even as early as the prologue, there's a character that you and I have argued about, discussed many times. You're very much pro Calor, and I'm just going to go with that narrative. Okay, so you can't put any nuance on that. AP
That is
loves
overly
Calor.
reductive, simplistic, and is misstating my position.
AP wants to be Calor. That's it. So,
Listen, you're the one that's hundreds of years old, you energy vampire.
well, you know. Anyway, so uh, there's another moment where, and these two authors, Esselmont and Erikson, do this to me all the time, where they force me to re-envision a character,
Yeah.
and when it's just a brief appearance, sometimes, and it's like, oh damn it, they did it again. So that's another thing in that I found in here that I loved, was that reevaluation that happens in a moment of connection and oftentimes compassion.
Yeah. And that's like you know that I'll never forgive Esselmont for Tayshrin.
Ah, yes, yes,
Like
yes.
to my dying day, I am never forgiving Esselmont for making me care about Tayshrin.
The character
But
you love to hate, yeah, until you couldn't anymore.
and again, like with that intro, if you think of the thematic things that we've already sort of mentioned, and like, is it fair to discuss the prologue in a spoiler free?
I mean, we can take a shot at it. I think we're gonna want to get into some spoilers too,
Yeah.
because there's
Like,
certain just wonderful things happening there. But yeah, spoiler
okay, so I
free.
won't go into details about it, but in terms of like what we see there, A,
Yeah,
it's a recontextualization of something that we thought we knew.
yeah,
And it's actually much more blatant, overt, and objective than the previous insight that we'd had into this.
yeah.
But does that change our mind about what this character's actions are later on? And again, it's we can look at those earlier things and go, where do we start the chain of causation? And
Mm,
this is a point sort of that will eventually lead us back to talking about Carsa if you want. But where do we start the chain of causation? Where does the buck stop in terms of the cause of something?
yeah,
Because at any moment that we pick, we can always look at an earlier moment that led to that because history and humanity is an ongoing series of connected things. There isn't really truly a beginning because things led up to that beginning that if they didn't exist, the beginning wouldn't have happened. So really, they're the beginning of that thing. And the more we understand of these other people, the more we gain insight into them, the harder it is to ignore them as enemy, ignore them as villain, ignore them and label them as monster and other. Because once we start seeing the complexity of other people,
yep,
it forces us to recognize the shared humanity. It forces us to understand that our perspective of them quite often is other people's perspective of us. That we are not privy to all of the information, and it becomes harder to just dismiss or reduce someone to a very simplistic label like evil when we actually get the full context. Now, that doesn't mean we condone their actions. It doesn't mean that we agree with their actions. We can still say what they did was wrong, that what they did was evil, that what they did. But we can talk about the action being evil instead of condemning the entire person as, well, they are just evil, as if that there's no aspect of them that had any positive qualities.
right.
And that challenges, and that's something that Erikson has done throughout, which is challenging this assumption of being certain about everything.
Mm,
That uncertainty is a necessary component, and we lie to ourselves when we apply certainty to it. And certainly seeing the chaos in some of the scenes which have quite devastating consequences, particularly later on in the book, because as readers, we're used to that dramatic irony of we know more than the characters do. We
Mm,
have all of these different pieces of information. We know who all these different characters are. We know what's going on. And then we see the inevitable coming because narrative quite often is a simplified form in order to make it palatable and understanding. The complexity and chaos of these things is very rarely relayed to us. And yet that's what we see here, particularly in some of the battle sequences that occur.
hmm.
That miscommunication happens, that people don't know what's going on, and you go, but you guys should be allies. But they don't know that. And so we see a lot of that, and we realize that this, looking at, yes, that was a terrible thing that happened to that person, but was it evil? Was it immoral that it was done?
Right.
It suddenly becomes a lot more complex. And that complexity is not to say that you don't still have evil acts, but it's to take a moment and instead of dismissing things, to actually consider the complexity of them. Because that complexity gives us a more nuanced and understanding approach.
Yeah,
And I think that's important.
100%. Yeah. Well said. And I suppose we can finish the non-spoiler part by going full circle and going back to Karsa. And it's more than just a Monty Python gag where you have Sir who will not be appearing in this film, right? I mean, I feel that there is some setting of the stage that has to happen in a sense. And now I know I appreciate that you know more than I do about this as an advanced reader, and there are certain things that you can't get into probably, but I feel as from just from my perspective already and reading these first two books in the series that a lot of Karsa is present even if he's not physically present in the story. That's number one. And number two, I also feel that we're going to see Karsa. And that entry is going to be all the more powerful because of how things have been set up here, I feel. And we're exploring Karsa's mind before we even see him on the page in many ways here.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Phil. If you had never heard, if Erikson had never said in an interview that he was going to write a trilogy about Carson,
Right, right, right.
and you had never heard anything about that, and all you saw was this is the first book of Witness. And
Yeah,
so in The God is Not Willing, we saw and followed the ramifications of something that Carson was involved with, but he's not there.
right,
You wouldn't go, oh, well, why isn't Karsa in it? Because there's no expectation that you're following the physical adventures of Karsa.
right.
With this book, again, if you didn't know that Erikson had initially conceived of writing a Karsa trilogy, and it was just called Tales of Witness. You're like,
Yeah.
what is being witnessed? What we're seeing is the ramifications of a whole sequence of actions, and all of them are located in some respect to this figure that ultimately I expect at some point we're going to have this whole thing with. But people, because they heard about it as the Karsa trilogy, a lot of expectations were created. This was going to feature Karsa as main character, much like that sequence in House of Chains,
Right.
that we were going to have a very focus driven narrative with this Conan-esque person riding through the plains, killing people, destroying things,
Yeah.
the barbarian adventure fantasy. And that's not what got delivered. And I think some people reacted quite negatively to that. And it's
Mm,
understandable. Like when you have very powerful preconceptions and notions about what something should be,
right.
it's very difficult to take a step back from that to go, well, what is this?
What is it
If I
actually trying to do rather than what that's what you often hear people say, well, this book wasn't what I wanted it to be. Well, why don't you try to figure out what it's trying to do instead?
and that's the thing, it's and people always misunderstand this point when I try to make it. And maybe it's I don't communicate it clearly enough.
Yeah,
No one is saying you have to enjoy the thing.
right.
What we're saying, or what I'm trying to say is, sometimes we build up expectations about how something should be. And when it doesn't meet those expectations, regardless of whether or not those expectations are built on any sort of solid foundation, it could be fancy and whimsy in the back of our head. We had
Yeah,
created this whole illusion and fantasy about what this thing is going to be. not living up to that is not necessarily the fault of the thing.
Right.
That quite often it's because we have deluded ourselves about what it was going to be. And then when it wasn't that, we went, but that's not what I wanted. And my favorite example of
Ironically, a
this,
very Malazan-esque theme, isn't it?
was a person who went off on one about Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing with like when you look at the blurb and you look at what they're complaining, you go, but the blurb is accurate, but it's accurate in a different way to how you thought it was going to be.
Right.
And what you wanted was an entirely different thing. That's not the book's fault.
Blurbs are
That's
like
the,
prophecies. They can come true in different ways. Yeah.
but it is so difficult for each of us to take a step back from that because of course, like we construct meaning. That's what our brains do. We construct meaning and understanding of the world around us. And so we go, oh, well, I look at this. I know that this is going to mean this thing and it should be doing this thing. And then when it doesn't follow that pattern, and I've talked about this before, we're reading against the text instead of trying to relax into what the text is doing. Is that any guarantee that we will enjoy the text more? Not necessarily, but we are more likely to enjoy a text if we try to follow what it is doing, what the author is doing through this text.
Yeah.
We're more likely to enjoy it than if we are constantly reading against it and trying to force the narrative or the story or the plot or the characters to do the thing that we think they should do.
Well, I actually think that Stephen Erikson should call me before he writes the next book and ask me what I want it to be.
Listen, I've had this conversation with Erikson and I've said, I want the next book to be these things. And he said, right, fine. Definitely do not do that because it will really annoy AP.
That sounds like something he would do.
But that's the joy. This is the great joy of literature.
Yes, yes. It's
Um,
for you to find new things and yeah.
and and what we have, I think, some of the dissatisfaction that people have, because we still, like, even informally, people talk about it as the Carsa trilogy or now like the Carsa
Yeah.
Quartet, but that's not its title.
I think the word witness is also a factor here, and people, I think, wrongly associate it just with Karsa because it's something he would always say witness, but that word is actually very important in multiple contexts within the Malazan world. So, yeah, and I think that it's important to pay attention to that as well as the title. What are the titles telling you? You know, and it goes way beyond just Karsa, doesn't it?
And again, so it brings me back to a lot that sometimes if our starting position is so askew
Mm,
that how we end up reading and interpreting what's in front of us, we get a very distorted image of it, or we distort our meaning, and that can make it less enjoyable. And that's why when I was talking at the beginning about how the initial version of this I saw, in a lot of respects was very, very different to this book
mm.
because that's what Erikson was writing and I saw it at that stage. I was very wary that I was mapping onto it things that shouldn't be there because I should be treating the text as it is, not, well, I know what this relates to and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And, that it's an interesting exercise.
You must have a
And,
very complicated brain, AP.
well, I did have an MRI recently and they found that I did have a brain. So that was
Oh,
nice.
well, that's
I,
reassuring. Yeah.
yeah, I finally have proof. There is actually one in there. Um,
It does
have you
rattle a
ever had
bit.
an MRI proving that you have a brain?
I've never needed that evidence.
Well, how do we know it's true unless there's evidence?
I suppose that's valid. Yeah.
Oh, one thing I will point out, it's not really a spoiler,
Okay.
but one thing I want everyone to look out for. Yeah, there are sappers in this. What is the difference between the sappers in this and all of the other sappers we've ever seen?
Okay. Do you want me to answer that or that's a
No, no, we'll see if people can answer in the comments.
okay. All right. I won't answer it then. But I did enjoy I'm enjoying the Malazan Marines 2.0 in this because Majory is on a different level, and that has a lot to do with the way magic has changed from the Malazan Book of the Fallen to this series, and it has to do with events which I won't get into because it's perhaps a little spoilery. But Icarium is a character who also has some pretty big reverberations in this series, you could say, right? Another character who's technically not present but is very much present, So that's kind of cool the way Erikson does that with some of these characters.
And that, sometimes when we see art, you go like it's the negative space is creating the pattern.
Yeah.
That I love it when Erikson plays with a lot of this stuff, and he's done it in other things as well,
Hmm.
where it's the like the projection of a shadow. And again, if we think of the importance of shadow in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but shadow itself doesn't have substance.
Right.
It's shaped by something that the light is hitting, and so it's this whole interplay of things can be enormously impactful without actually being the solid thing in the focus,
Hmm.
or creating resonances or distorting patterns without actually being present in the thing. Like I love the almost like meta narrative of all of this. And
Yeah.
there's some one thing is like when you're reading through it, you can certainly see certain moments where Erikson talking about quite specifically elements of narrative or elements of how readers respond to things and
Yeah.
what there are some nice little moments where Erikson has a joke almost breaking the fourth wall through a character, and it's I quite enjoy that. And I
Yeah.
know not everyone does, but I love those sorts of moments where I go, I like, okay, fine, fine, Mr. Erikson, I won't do that anymore.
Yeah, like Shadow is so important in this book and in the series in general that he should write a book with the word shadow in the title, maybe. Like, I don't know, A Walk in Shadow or something like that.
No, no, perambulation in shadow. Like that's
Oh, that's
clearly the
much better.
superior.
That's
Yeah,
much
that's the superior title.
Speaking of obnoxious readers, sorry, Stephen
Like,
Erickson.
in fact, I'll email him now. I go, Steve, you should write a book called Perambulation in Shadow and see what he says.
I think it's brilliant. Bestseller for sure. Yeah. So, all right, I think we're being goofy now. So,
Okay.
we're going to say au revoir to everyone, unless you have anything else you want to say, non-spoiler, before we go over to your channel.
Okay, well, one last thing. We briefly mentioned the humor, and
Okay.
one of the things I thought was interesting. There are a number of elements from the Malazan Book of the Fallen that had raised questions about how this happened or how that happened.
Yeah.
And what we see here, there are a number of moments that you can actually sort of match back to things that we've heard about before
Hmm.
and see it happen in a different way. And I find that quite interesting that Erikson isn't talking about history being cyclical, but this whole idea like history rhymes, that it may not be an exact repetition, but we start to see these recurrent patterns. And given the setting of Seven Cities, given the nature of this particular plot, where we see again the rise of an aspect, we see a similar sort of thing being set up. Now, it's not the same. The same thing is not happening again, but it's the similar thing. So it's not that history is cyclical in that sort of repetitious way, but we're seeing elements that have this resonance, that have this rhyme, that um, a bell was struck in the past, and we still are getting those echoes and the slight distortion of them through time. And I think that's an important aspect. While this story is, in a lot of respects, very self contained, it fits very neatly into the entire Malazan history. We can see it thematically connected. We can see the resonance of acts that happened in the world. We can see the ramifications and repercussions of characters. And we can see patterns emerging again.
Hmm.
And just like with the humor, it's just because the thing is happening again, it's well, okay, well, how do we deal with it? The humor might be our defense against the darkness or our defense against despair. Do we learn from the past or do we just repeat the mistakes of the past?
Right.
And so again, I think Erikson asks us a lot of questions and invites us to explore different aspects. but I don't think at any point is he dictating to us how we should feel and behave.
Right.
And something I greatly appreciate is the vast majority of the time, Erikson leaves it up to us as reader. Like, he makes the position that he wants to make. He argues and shows us the different things that he wants to show us, but
Right.
he leaves it up to us to evaluate it and to come to our own sort of positions and justifications of it.
Yeah.
And as a style, I greatly appreciate that. And that balancing of the darkness and existential angst, the wrath and the rage, and the humor and the camaraderie, that it is a wonderful mix of these things that is a replication of the sheer complexity of the world that we actually live
Mm.
in. And that I thought was nice to see reflected on the page.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So history, not so much as a circle, but more like a gyre, I guess. Right. Yeah. Uh,
The center cannot hold.
no, no, indeed. We know that. You know that poet pretty well, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, he still owes me $20.
So, all right, with that, then, thanks everybody for watching. And as I've said a couple times, we're going to be continuing this discussion, but with big old spoilers. We're getting into the nitty gritty, into all the exciting stuff that happens in No Life Forsaken over at A Critical Dragon. In case you don't know where that is, there will be a link in the description so you can follow us there. We'll probably space these videos out. I'm guessing a day or two or
Yeah.
something apart. So we'll figure that out. But to become coming soon at a channel near you. Uh, okay. In the meantime, though, thanks for coming along, and till next time.